My name is Tom Spencer. I am an aspiring AI engineer and a startup founder and LangChain community organizer. And with me is Cameron. How are you, mate?
Hey everybody, Cameron Rohn. I guess these days I call myself a AI or an agent engineer.
Hot.
Always have focused on the infrastructure side of things.
You there? All right, sweet. All right, what are we talking through today? What are we going through?
Well, we've got a couple newsworthy items. I'm curious to hear what you've been interested in lately. We've talked about memory. Of course,
Mm,
I always come to the table with some MCP tidbits, so I think we'll start there. And then we've got some really cool demos that I'm excited about.
yeah, I'm excited to see. So I want to know how you use Claude Code. I've been using Claude Code a fair bit this week and absolutely burning my API credits. So I think I'm going to upgrade to Max soon. But I'm keen to see how you use it as well. And then I want really
I
excited to
start
see the Open Agent platform too, the demo that you got for that. So yeah,
Yeah. So, Tom, what are your initial thoughts on Claude Code other than burning through your credits?
I think I need to know how to use it more effectively, which is kind of the reason why I want to do that session today. Is like basically I think I'm underusing it relative to the benchmarks I'm seeing other people get in terms of output. The other factor is I think I'm using it just turning on my awesome camera. I think I'm kind of using it kind of like Cursor, but I don't think that's how it's supposed to be used. Like I'm coming from the Cursor agent. So yeah. What about you?
Yeah, I love Claude Code. I think it works great. I honestly forget about it sometimes. So, and that's one of the big things with like Codex. I mean, we have all these new amazing tools that have come out in the last, month or so, and just making that transition because I'm a big user of Klein. It's a VS Code extension, and I've been using that, I guess, for so long that it's hard to make that switch. So every once in a while, when I'm having an issue with Klein, I'm like, oh yeah, just use Claude Code. And initially, I didn't use it as much because of the credits. It was burning through API credits, but now, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the usage is included with your monthly subscription. Is that right?
Yeah, there's two levels. So max $100 and $200 a month. Basically, they said as soon as you need to use it in any kind of work context, get the max subscription because like
Hmm.
even for some of the demos I was spinning through for our conversation, like I'd spent like $1.20 just screwing around with my Claude MD file. I'm like, well, that was pretty expensive, like file edit kind of conversation, right? So, and I believe there's a benchmark, but in the interviews that the guys did, like there's a benchmark of how much usage you get in both of those. But in the conversations, they basically said, look, most people just never touch the limit. So they're obviously trying to push people into the subscription. But let's talk about more about that when we get to it. A few things caught my eye this week in terms of updates and news items. What have you seen which you thought was pretty interesting?
Model context protocol. There's been some advancements in the last, I don't know, week or so, couple weeks. And I think we talked about it last week a little bit, or at least indicated. A lot of initial complaints about MCP have been around, well, it's kind of a disaster when it comes to finding servers. Are they, do they work? Are they good? Because to this point, it's primarily been individual developers creating servers, putting them on GitHub. Of course, Anthropic has a page with links to their officially supported servers, which is fine. But recently, they've taken it to the next step and they're creating an actual registry as well as pre-built integrations. Okay, you may have noticed previously you've always had your MCP servers and tools listed on this search and tools setting. There's a new button down here called Add Integrations. And this is really designed for the officially supported remote servers, which you can build yourself. And they're creating an actual formal registry for. So if you click on this, you'll notice it's very different than previously. You'd have to configure the JSON file. And Tom, if you're familiar with that, you go into the Claude
Yeah.
code and it's a little bit messy. It's hard to maintain. So, in my opinion, the remote servers are a big deal. Well, definitely once you get into a business environment for a lot of reasons, security, role-based access, things like that. But even just even if you're using it personally, from a configuration standpoint, this is so much more clean. So instead,
Yeah,
you'll
that's
just put
great.
in the remote URL and your server name. And I'm sorry, I'm throwing errors like crazy because this is on my Windows computer, and I haven't been using it as much. So these are old
Not like
servers.
It's not like MCP to
But
throw problems.
well, exactly. I guess that's good because it illustrates the point. When you're running these servers locally, or even with Docker, it's hard to maintain. You might have been working on some project on your computer and
Mm.
change some packages or something, and then all of a sudden your MCP servers don't work. So of course that's not a maintainable good way, but that's why this integrations feature is the next big step forward.
Yeah, that's great. That's really good.
And apologies, I didn't have any actual remote servers configured in here, but you see these examples like GitHub, Gmail. These are official,
Mm.
and it's really the same process. So you'll
Yeah.
add the server, and then you'll authenticate your account, and that is in comparison to setting it up locally. You would add your API key into the Claude desktop or whatever MCP client you're using. You'd have to
Mm.
manually configure these things. So now they've integrated OAuth, and it's just a much more smooth process.
Do you like? This is awesome. Do you have like a place where you go for like a trustworthy marketplace of MCP servers?
Yeah, there's actually, I participated in a hackathon that was sponsored by Pulse MCP, and they have done a great job. They were one of the early, I mean, there are a lot of registries and attempts at registries out there, but I found that they're generally the most solid. And actually, it's funny, they have an MCP server that you can set up that will find MCP servers. And I can show that. It's useful.
Meta.
So, Tom, you see here, this is a list of my MCP servers I have configured, and I have Pulse MCP. So if you click on that, this will list the tools that server has available. And actually, this layout that they've added is really nice because it was a lot more difficult before. It was like 3 or 4 clicks to go in and look at a server and find out what tools it has. So this is really nice. So what I did there is I said, find an MCP server for Gmail. So it thought about it, and then it used the Pulse MCP server. It checked out their registry and said, "Hey, here are the top rated Gmail related MCP servers that you can check out."
That is a great recommendation. What's it called? Pulse
Pulse MCP.
MCP.
I believe
Yeah,
it's
that's
just
awesome.
pulsemcp. And there are quite a few out there. Yeah, it's just pulsemcp.com. And you can go to their website, share that real quick.
Yeah, bring it up.
Cool. So here we have Pulse MCP, and actually they have an API, and that's how the MCP server works. So if you have an app, or for some reason you want to pull in a list of MCP servers, that is free and available. If you go down here to the bottom, you click on this API, it will show you instructions. So you could integrate this into your own app if you'd like. But on Pulse MCP, they have a list of their servers, and you can sort by, I mean, these are the official providers. These are essentially the ones that were listed on the Model Context Protocol servers page. And then we also have the ones that were developed by Anthropic. And there's they changed this around a bit, but what I liked was there was a way to sort for if it's a Python based server or JavaScript. And now I don't see it here, but yeah, this is a great starting point. There are a bunch of them out there.
Hmm.
I either haven't looked at this in a bit, or this is new. I didn't see this remote available. So these are going to be servers that are capable of that remote MCP connection, like we were just talking about.
That's sick. All right, that's great. I've already learned something. Thanks, mate.
Yeah, it's a fantastic resource.
Yeah.
And actually, now that I think about it, they are Pulse MCP. They're on the official steering committee for MCP,
For
which
MCP.
congrats to those guys. It's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. It's them and all the bigwigs, right?
Yep.
It's interesting, like people saying as a protocol, like so the Sam Altman mentioned this, but also the founder of Letta mentioned this as well, that they thought MCP will require either something else will replace it or it will require a major upgrade. But it could be one of those things where just because there is enough momentum, it may in its current form just come to dominate anyway, and we'll just be stuck with the way it's built. I don't know.
Exactly. Like we talked about before. I mean, there are issues definitely, but it's so early and at least we're all aiming in the same direction now, right?
Yeah. Well, but you know how like sometimes in technology adoption, it's about distribution more than about quality, right? So JavaScript is a terrible language, in my opinion. Like it's just hard to use. I hate the syntax. I hate the way it looks. But it's the language of the web, right? And because of the browser, like it just dominated everything else.
Right.
So
I think
it's
a lot of
sometimes it's about
it seems like a
distribution,
lot
right?
of people feel that way.
Maybe it's also just I'm showing my colors because I'm not great at development. But anyway, moving on.
Well,
Hey,
we were talking about before, just real quick. We talked about gum loop. You brought that up last week, and there are some arcade is another one.
yeah,
There are things that are evolving and making MCP more accessible, and really, it's more like an app store, or maybe like if you're familiar with Zapier or some of these things where you don't have to understand MCP or even know that it's an MCP configuration on the back end. They're making these things more accessible. And at the end of the day, we're really just talking about integrations.
yeah. I like with most things in AI and AI products at the moment, there's too much technical exposure and not enough like product interaction. Like no one should really know what top K is. Like that doesn't make any sense. Like no one should know what that is or number of steps, any of that stuff. Like system prompts, all of that's prompt engineering. Even it's like a user shouldn't have to deal with any of that, right? And I think MCP is another example of that. Like where it's at now, it should just be, well, in natural language, I just say, go and get me my emails, and it knows I have Gmail, and then it chooses the correct or installs something to go and get it, and it all happens in the abstraction layer beneath what the user sees.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm really excited. It feels like things are a lot more approachable these days, and it's going to be a big theme this year, I think.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. I have to check that out. So things that caught my eye this week, Perplexity launched their Labs product, which looks really cool. I want to dive into that. I might do that for some of our podcast planning. But basically, they're trying to enter into the artifacts game effectively, which is really cool. And you also mentioned that they might have a deal with, there was a news story where they might have a deal with Apple, I think, as a default search provider. Did you see that?
Samsung.
Samsung. Sorry, not Apple.
What,
Samsung.
yeah, what I thought was interesting about that, and not that they've shied away from it at all, but on Perplexity's website, they have an article titled Samsung Eyes Perplexity to Replace Google on Galaxy phones.
Yeah,
So
it's pretty good.
that's the goal.
Those guys.
And of course, all the controversy with Google Chrome, it's a good time for them to step in.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the antitrust case, and the government's moved at just at the point where probably Google's dominance in search will be more challenged than ever, effectively, in history, in the history of search. It's pretty funny. A couple of other things. So I didn't dive into this Google Edge AI platform or sort of release that those guys put out, but it's coming into summer at the moment, and I've got my kids and I'm trying to figure out like projects and stuff I'm going to do with them. One of the things, I want to do some physical device projects with them. And I want to see like some of the models that they've actually released are incredible for edge, like on-device computing effectively. So I'm not sure if you saw it, Gemma N. They've got it in research preview. We'll put the link in the show notes, but basically it's like a hyper small, like small parameter model. I've never really needed to do anything in this domain for work, but it looks really powerful. and really innovative. There's like I'm calling it like the Russian doll effect, where there's like smaller models within bigger models, and then they activate kind of like a mixture of experts, but more advanced. They've got a specific kind of research area that they've expanded into. So yeah, I've been looking into that actually. It's been really cool. So there's this Google Edge AI kind of open source package where they're trying to get their edge models into any device, not necessarily just Android devices, but also iOS. And I want to put it on, see if I can get it onto like a really small, like Raspberry Pi or Orange Pi kind of thing as like a project with my kids. So yeah,
That's
I've been diving
awesome.
into that.
And if you figure out how to get them excited, let me know, because I did buy like 2 or 3 different Raspberry Pis for that same purpose. And then at some point I was like, man, now I'm basically just sitting here playing with Raspberry Pis by myself.
Oh mate, my house is littered with
So
STEM projects that never got off the ground. So we'll see how it goes. Yeah, what else? I was playing with Open Agent platform this week from LangChain, so I'm keen for you to show me that and dive into that a bit more. And then actually, I've been doing some agent work in my actual job. So we're redesigning some of our iOS app and integrating some data. So I was actually playing with Doc ETL, which you showed me in more detail. Yeah, for like an ETL kind of extraction pipeline. Yeah, which is really fun. I'd recommend if you've got one of those tasks, is like I've got data coming from one app to another, different formats, PDFs, variability. It's rad. That's a great tool. Like it's really good. So yeah, that's been a lot of fun.
And just to recap on exactly what that is, it's more than just document extraction, right? It's an agentic workflow for that
And analysis,
ETL process, right?
Yeah. It can give you insights and analytics as well as, over a corpus of, like, what I'm using it for is actually probably a pretty thin application, because you can put in a corpus of documents and then get insights and like activate a corpus of documents, like hundreds or thousands or whatever. Whereas my pipeline is very simple, but even then it's a really powerful tool. And we'll chuck it in the show notes again. It's Doc ETL. Yeah, other than that, man, like that's pretty much it. I saw LangFuse. I don't know if you use LangFuse much, but they open sourced their whole stack this week, which is interesting because they're like I think they're built on top of LangChain, or they have a WYSIWYG editor, but then they've got their competitor to LangSmith and a bunch of other things. And they released it. They're open sourcing all of it. I'm assuming to get more distribution. So their package downloads, I think, is like 7 million a month or something, whereas LangChain's ones are really, really high. I think last time we talked about it was like 70 million, something like that a month.
Yeah, right. And I set up LangFuse a while back, and I really don't remember the details. Have you experimented with it enough lately that you would
not lately
be able to compare?
Not lately. I sort of fell off.
LangSmith?
Yeah.
But it's the same idea, right? It's observability.
Yeah, it's basically it's a comparable stack, right? I don't know what your opinion is of this, like the frameworks. So there's the big model companies are basically saying, if you're going to use a framework, use ours. And then there's model agnostic frameworks like LangChain, which I think is the best in the market. And I think developers are kind of voting with their feet in that direction. But they're very opinionated in how they do it. And then there's these other ones, some of which we'll show today, of like Letta and some of these other ones that have their opinionated approach. Like, I don't know what your opinion is around like which ones are better, like what the on-ramp should be. Like, it seems like the only distinction is basically like the big model providers don't necessarily like the coordinated open source projects because they give optionality in model choice.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, the bigger players, they have their platforms for observability, but like you said, you're locked in. Microsoft Azure has amazing tools, but it's a little bit more of a challenge to use them agnostically. I guess it just kind of depends what you're trying to do, but I'm biased just like you. I'm a big LangChain, LangGraph fan. I don't work there. I don't get paid by them in any way. I just really love their products and their vision. And for me, especially with LangGraph platform and some of these things we'll show, it seems like a more complete ecosystem. And it's not just when it comes to AI. I've always been a big promoter of build an ecosystem, not a bunch of disparate tools. And
Hmm.
LangChain, LangGraph really allows you to do that.
Yeah. I don't know the answer, like, and it's sort of hard to get a sense of it. I have noticed that, like, when these other providers are releasing certain things into the developer ecosystem, they'll say it's all Open AI API compatible. Basically, to say, like, if you've built into it, so it seems like the way that they build into their APIs is sort of how everyone else is trying to compete, and then they say you can just swap it out, it's fine. And then there's projects like Open Router as well, where it's like you can route based on cost and performance. Yeah. Anyway, all right. Do you want to talk about memory?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. All right, cool. Yeah, so I've been diving into memory a lot. After the conversation we had last week, yeah, I went on a bit of a deep dive. I've got my own, obviously, interest and reasons for doing that around the applications I want to build and some enterprise kind of AI app problem sets that specifically relate to memory that I think are interesting to discuss. But I know you looked into MemO, which is one I haven't looked at.
Zero.
Mem Zero. Mem Zero. It's very American. Mem Zero. Yeah, so I think what's probably pretty helpful for this conversation is I've got a little graph, like neural graph, that I think is pretty cool to show as we jump into this conversation. Did you see this? This transformer circuits kind of visualization thing from Anthropic. They published a piece of research a while back, which you probably did see, which is basically called transformer circuits, sort of like a visualization of how AI models kind of function. And these guys, I'll put the research in the show notes, or the paper in the show notes. But these guys basically launched this circuit tracing kind of visual, which is really cool. Did you see this? Came out. So their circuit tracing paper, which you can find on their research blog. The reason why I thought it'd be good to like refresh, particularly because it's always important to remember, like this circuit tracing basically visualization where as an LLM traverses through the layers of, as the transformer model traverses through the different layers in its architecture, it's making associations and connections, right? It's kind of like like that's why they call it a neural network, with the intent of building a prediction towards a certain outcome. So this tool is super helpful. Can you see that? I'll just zoom in a bit, where you can line up a template. So you can put your own in, which is a statement. And then basically they say you just put in a statement and then leave the last word off. And it gives you a visual of how an AI model, an LLM, will try and predict the last word. And these are really simple ones. So this is Gemma 2B, so a really small model. And then this is basically a fact. The capital of the state containing Dallas is. So obviously Cameron, where you live. So it's like the answer up in the top right-hand corner is Austin, right? And then on this visualization, you can see both the neural net, which we'll talk about in a second in terms of like how these things are associated in a graph, but also its prediction along the layers to get to the correct predictive answer. And then the component parts that drive the LLM towards the right answer. So these are different nodes. So for example, Texas, you see there, as it traverses along the bottom of the word. So in fact, the capital of the state containing Dallas is. And these are the number of associations. And then for each one, it actually highlights within the training data in the bottom right-hand corner, like what are all of the associated nodes within the training set, or associated data points within the training set. So for example, Texas, and those are all of the references to Texas that are affiliated or associated with that. So it's really important to highlight that this is not thinking in the way that we think of the concept, right? It's basically just a prediction. And so as we talk about memory, it's important to note that like basically all we're trying to do with memory in a really basic sense is just optimize that prediction to a better outcome. Like, would you...
This is super cool. I didn't see this in the blog post.
I think it's new. It's called this circuit tracing kind of thing. These guys have a whole product. I'm not exactly sure what the whole thing is. It's like visualizations and Yeah, not exactly
This
sure.
is all based on the paper that we talked about last week, right? Tracing LLMs.
I think that's a different one, unless it's this one, circuit tracing revealing the complex. Was it this one?
No, it's different.
Yeah, I think this is different.
Sorry, I don't want to sidetrack you, but yeah, this is
No,
awesome.
that's okay.
I'm going to check this out.
Yeah, check it out. It's in the notes, but like you can put your own thing in there, but then there's also these templates which are cool because they're kind of like more optimized, I guess, for the visualization and try to teach people how these things work. Also, there's like the graph info at the top right-hand corner here, which you can check out as well, which is sort of like how to read it. Yeah, so this is Michael Jordan. Is that French? Basketball, poker, foot, tennis, baseball, golf, basketball, basket. And then you can see the probability likelihood of basketball, effectively like the most probable answer and how it got there. What is interesting is like, say you've got, like I'll take it back to the one that I was on before, like this Austin one, it's probably a better visual. And that was a very key pivot point around the term Dallas, right? And then it also, you could see the way that it was sort of traversing the layers is to define the word capital. So you can see here, the context of the term capital means different things. So down in the right-hand corner, there's the capital of, and that's a reference to the capital of a Muslim country, which is KL, which is Kuala Lumpur, right? In Malaysia. So it's traversing the concept of capital. But underneath that, there are references to the concept of, financial capital as well that it kind of traversed over when I was going through this. Yeah, right. So raising capital, and it's trying to figure out the context around these terms in order to get to the term at the end. And it's a really great visual, and to remember, like, it's just maths, right? How these things are built. But then also, say Haiku, which is the small anthropic model, approaching and traversing the same question, has a very different graph visualization or graph approach. So how these things sort of function differently. There's like different language activations come up in, say, there when it looks the capital, and the top one is French, which is completely different. And the number of steps, effectively. So the number of steps is lower. But you can figure that out. You have to play with it to, layer 17 before it gets to Austin, whereas the previous one was layer 24. And Texas is the same pivot point though.
Right. And this was the visibility into the black box that we have not had to this point, right? Yeah. I mean, this is super cool.
As you referenced it last week as well, that was also something on my mind, is sort of like, that's a cool project because it sort of tries to give people a visualization and a reminder that these, like even simple models like that are, you can actually kind of peer inside the black box to a point. There is also that research on that came out after the reasoning models started being released, where they were trying to get it to, like, number one, expose their thinking, but also number two, like, change and hack and hijack their thinking and see the results, which is pretty cool. So you can actually peer in there, like the researchers in that domain, which I believe was Anthropic as well. They were basically trying to hack or hijack the thinking blocks as the model was trying to reason towards the correct answer by injecting incorrect, or distracting tokens to see how far off the path they could get it. By saying, for example, like that question, like, what's the capital of the state of Texas? And then they'd put into the reasoning tokens, inject things like, oh, isn't it Los Angeles or whatever, like just completely off base to try and get it to see how they could push it off. And it was surprisingly resilient based on those associations, which is pretty cool. But
a tool like this is super helpful, of course, for researchers, but some people say, doesn't this help malicious actors kind of formulate their prompt injection techniques and things like that? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Prompt injection's interesting. I think for simple versions like this, so those are simple models. I don't know if you could do that for a lot of these closed models, probably because they're quite worried about those things, right? That prompt injection and prompt hacking. So enterprises are really worried about that, and like conservative organizations. So it makes sense, like you would say, wouldn't it be better if these things weren't exposed? In reality, it is very easy to prompt hack, to hack and inject and get these models to do things they're not supposed to do based on the safety guardrails, right? The best strategy I've seen, and this is played out with agentic apps that I've built. You know, the company I work in is in a very highly regulated industry. It's in the banking and mortgage finance industry, right? In the US. The best way to avoid those things is to have clear output parameters around how the model should respond, and then also guardrails that prevent it from executing if thresholds are not met, right? Which is something that I think people sort of forget about in the application architecture space around these things, to say, well, they can be hacked, prompt injection's a problem, hallucinations everywhere. You're just like, well, yeah, just stop it running. Like, just don't let it run. You don't have to say yes. It's like, you're in control, right? I think the greatest example that I saw of that was at the LangChain conference a couple of weeks back. And the guys from BlackRock talked about their LLM as a judge benchmarks around agent or response execution for investment strategies. Sorry, I just switched microphones. Yeah. The BlackRock guys showed off that functionality really well in their agent execution, I think, as a way to avoid those things. Basically, it was a long way of answering your question. You can't get away from those things. The only way you can stop it is to have those guardrail overlays, I think, in the way you build the apps. What do you think?
Yeah, that's true. And as far as, exposing potential security issues like that, that's not a new concept. And unless you work in the security world, you may not understand why it's important. And, it happens all the time. People will release tools and say, now we've discovered these vulnerabilities. Here are the tools to go to exploit it. And that's not necessarily a malicious thing. That's actually a good thing, because it forces, companies and providers to address their issues. And just because we don't know about it doesn't mean that someone else won't find out, right? So it's important that those things are exposed and fixed. And that's when you hear the word, 0 days and vulnerabilities, patching, things like that. That's not new at all. And the same concepts apply to AI, right? So if there's a model that's really vulnerable to certain types of prompt injections or some type of behavior we don't want, we want to know about it. And like you said, that allows you to customize your guardrails, pay closer attention to things like that in your observability metrics. So it is a good thing.
I think the solution for that is going to be similar to how databases evolved, right? Which is open source will expose the strategies that are required to make things secure. Like open systems with more people pushing the boundaries on them are generally more robust in the software domain than closed systems where you've got a certain number of paid people that are required to make them secure. That's generally how it's played out, right? Because just the numbers. Generally, yeah. There was, and I don't remember, we'll have to add the link so people can go look at it, but there was an instance recently where somebody had been maintaining an open source repository for, I think it was years before they exploited it, and it turned out it was malicious. So there are instances. That's interesting. People will argue both ways, but in general, the idea is that it's out in the open, and if there are issues with it, especially if it becomes really popular, that those will be exposed and fixed. But that's another interesting angle that I hope doesn't become widespread. Yeah. If you're interested in that idea, I read a really good book on this, like open source kind of topologies and open source culture from Stripe Press. Have you ever read any of the Stripe Press books? I don't think so. It's the greatest marketing, I don't know, I work in marketing, but it's it's the greatest nerd-based marketing in the world. Free. And free. Every time I see them at conferences, I go on and demand that they give me free books. I've got this one with the big score behind me. there is, this one, working in public, and it's basically it's kind of like if someone did a PhD on open source culture and open source software development and the different topologies of different packages and how they work and where they come from and all these different things. It'd be great to dive into that actually a bit more, but I recommend that because she talks about like some of these like lost packages that are just holding up certain really critical infrastructure, that it's just like one or two devs, really thankless task, that then are potential attack vectors or vectors like you describe. I think that's pretty rare, but yeah.
That's cool. So do I have to go to
It's a
a
great
marketing conference to get access to this, or I'm looking like
No, you can just buy the digital version. But if you go to a dev conference, there might be some Stripe guys, and they always give their books away for free. I don't know, the Collison brothers must be big readers because they've got like, this one's really good, Get Together, that's like on building community, it's sick. There's one in here I really want to, there's this one which Tyler Cowan, I don't know if you know him, he's an economist. He's great, and he's got a book in here as well. But then there's, the really cool ones are the ones that are just about games. Like this is one I really want to read. It's like basically the story of Prince of Persia. Do you remember Prince of Persia? Yeah. Oh man, such a sick game. It's like some of these ones, it's like the early stories of Silicon Valley and stuff that are really cool.
That's
Anyway,
awesome.
That was a good side.
Another thing to
Good
add
side
to my
hustle.
list.
Let's talk a bit. Yeah. Well, let's talk about memory. So the reason why we got down this path is basically there's a couple of reasons why we need really good memory and memory architecture, right? And we talked about this a little bit. It's important to separate our perception of like how these models will evolve as consumer products, where you might need it to be like a second brain equivalent, which is different to the way I've been thinking about it more, and sort of the things that are not being built at the moment in any kind of meaningful, structured way are how enterprises building software applications or relying on these sort of intelligent apps, AI-powered apps, how do they embed and encode like enterprise culture and enterprise knowledge in a secure, reliable, safe, usable way that also has like the permissioning and the like right state and also revisions and a bunch of stuff that you would require. Like that is an interesting area, and it hasn't really been nailed in my opinion, but there's a lot of different approaches, so I thought it would be helpful to talk through the different approaches and some of the players.
Yeah, definitely.
The article that I read which spurned this on was this MemOS paper. Now it's a pretty light on paper, you probably don't have to read it, I can give you the TLDR. I think it's just like a concept really that they're proposing, but it had some interesting ideas in there. They don't have a product behind this yet, there's no real code, so you can't dive in to see what they're actually building behind it. But first up, it's good to articulate, like, and they do this pretty well in that paper, like what the different types of memory are. So like that visualization I was showing you before, do you remember when LLMs really started getting going and we had a thing called KV cache? Do you remember the KV cache? Like, we all got really excited, which is basically like every time you chatted in the assistant, it remembered who you are.
Right.
Which we thought was an incredible innovation. So there's a couple of different types of memory that LLMs or these models can have. There's stored memory, which is a lot of what people have focused on, which is like things that are like, and there's different types of stored memory, but some, like the MemOS guys call that plain text. I think plain text is basically stored data. Doesn't necessarily have to be text, but you get the idea. It's stored in a
That's
in
going
a
to be
third-party
more
set.
like, more like RAG, right? When people think of memory.
Yeah. RAG is a technique to go and retrieve plain text memory effectively, or basically things that you want the LLM to know, either in a hot path or in cold storage effectively, sort of like however you want to structure your database storage, but it's stored in a database. It's like separate to the actual model. And then there's the attention layer memory, which is like KV cache and that sort of stuff, which is what's in the context window effectively. Like it doesn't really get any more complex than that. It's whatever's in the context window, and however that context window is being manipulated is called the attention layer of memory. And some of the players that we could talk through
modulate the attention layer, effectively injecting things into the context window in real time relative to what's going on to make the model have a sense of memory so that the predictions are getting better and better over time through the interactions it's having. And then there's the underlying layer of memory, which is the actual model weights, right, and how it's trained. That's a version of memory, and Karpathy mentions this as like, it's kind of like memory in that, like, you know, you ask a model like, all right, you know, what's the capital of Texas? It doesn't, it's what it, quote, remembers. It doesn't know that, and that's in the training data. And then there's the manipulation path of that as well, which is really exciting and interesting around how you manipulate the memory state for that outcome. And those are the sort of the key areas. What I think is fascinating is how we think about building enterprise applications in the AI space is like, those are all relatively standard. We kind of know and understand those, right? And we have, obviously, database storage has been around for ages. Like how you teach like Salesforce to know who your leads are, right? It's just like, you know, that's a known, well-described domain. These other two areas are newer, but not completely crazy, and we've got different methods we can talk through around how they use those things. But what isn't really defined is how you build the architecture of your memory so it's maintainable, so it's like scalable. How do you create memory layers that your enterprise application will pull into at certain times when a user needs it or when the assistant needs it? We can talk through those definitions in a moment. And then what's the pathway for more persistent updates? So for example, if you were saying, well, I want my model to learn, I want my app to learn the behavior, like what my business customers need, and I want it to adapt over time. Well, you can't just say every time it talks to Karen from accounting, then update your permanent memory, right? Because Karen might be nuts. Like there's a real consideration around like who gets the, like, who writes the memory, how important are the things that your app is interacting with, particularly if it's across lots of users. How important are those interactions? How do you weight different people in the organization? What's the quality standard you're looking for? How do you make sure that that's not, that's really secure? Like a lot of the memory conversation is very one-to-one. Like at the moment, it's like our interactions with it is like, all right, I'm using ChatGPT and it's updating its memory relative to me as a user. But platforms like LangMem from LangChain, Letta as well, they've got this concept of like multi-user, multi-thread. So you might have one agent that's interacting with lots of users. You might have one agent that has another agent interaction on multiple agents that it's also learning from and updating its memory. And that architecture and the hierarchy, I think, is pretty fascinating. I don't know if you looked into that much or thought about.
I do, and that's what we can show that some of that during the demo. And even for like customer service agents, you mentioned having all these different users, and it's things like this will be huge for like customer service and providing a personalized experience where a lot of customer service agents today, or even agentic or just workflows in general, are going to be like a RAG knowledge base. And it's great that you can pull your information and give access to it to the LLM, but this new wave of what we're talking about in memory now is quite a bit different. And Tom, it's funny, as I was going through things, I found some notes because I have been interested in this area for quite a while. I mean, almost since the beginning of when I started getting really deep in the AI, and I came up with this couple notes that what makes good AI memory, and I wrote down a backstory, so like static demographic information, that could be like a configuration file. You have memories, and that could be experiences that you had, and then you have tone and style, which is really hard to capture. But these, like in the Mem0 and MemOS, we're talking about essentially an agentic layer specifically for memories. And they are leveraging LLMs specifically at that memory layer, right? So you're using an agent, if you're using Anthropic through the API, and then you have your memory storage. And on the backside of that memory storage there are also LLMs now that are extracting that information and creating much more rich context. And so I just thought that was interesting because that was quite a while ago, and it fits perfectly in line with where we're at. I mean, now it's going to be a lot easier to capture those nuances. And the reason that I came up with that was because at the time I was working on an email RAG system, and I came across all these. I was like, oh man, I'm going to build this agent that just knows exactly how I email and who these people are. And there's so many sources of information that actually make up our memories and ultimately our ability to act on things, right? So I think this will be huge.
Yeah, I think that's interesting you said that. There are differing opinions, right? Whereas you hear like some people in the industry say memory is not the key. Like it's just more compute and like better and massive context windows, and we'll get it through, which is kind of like, you know, I think this debate is like the expression of the bitter lesson, which is engineers getting smart, doing smart stuff doesn't beat just shitloads of compute, right? Is my simple Simon Redirectness summary of this. And this, I don't know, it like my assessment is that that's not true in this context, because it doesn't matter how smart something is, unless it fits you like a glove, then it won't feel good, which is really important in software, right? That's like one of the most critical things. That's why product matters. That's why like the user experience is basically that definition. And user experience can be the individual or it can be the organization, right? So that's why I think it's critical. But
what really stood out to me. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go on. Like I think that's an interesting kind of industry debate, but we should probably park it until there's a bit more clarity.
Yeah.
Well, just to pick up on something you just said there, which is like there's tone and style, which is sort of like the behavior of the system, right? But then there's also memories and experience. Like, so what's happened in the past? Like, did you see Cursor finally released V1 this week? And in part of that, they have these background agents and then this learned style from prior sessions. They're basically embedded a version of what we're talking about as one of the features that they released. Part of that is that experience layer, right? Which is like learning from things you've done before. The LangChain guys have their definitions of these as well, which is basically memory all in that plain text format, which is like stuff it can draw on to be better. And in the context of how it behaves, that's basically, it's only ever drawing on a storage domain, which is either a basic SQL, no SQL, vector store combo, just vector store, or a knowledge graph, or some combination of all of those, and we can talk through how the guys do it, updating in real time or in some smart way into the context window. And that's really it. Like all of the variations and all of the innovation that we're talking around, like say tone and style, and I can show you an example in a second from the OpenAI documentation around how they do this, or they recommend doing this, is like all of that is just in that context window injection component, or real-time updates on the system prompt, those sorts of things.
I think that's what stood out to me the most going through Mem0 and MemOS is the importance of updating information, and it's basically like an abstraction layer. And when I say agentic workflow on the backside, that's a big part of it, is the updates. So if you're just storing your data in a RAG database, then you would have to make tool calls and specifically say, I want to save this information, where these solutions have intelligence built in. And if you read through these papers, the validating and updating information really stands out to me as one of the most important pieces. And it's something that I wasn't thinking as much about before.
Yeah, and this relates to sleep time compute, and also, is this in Mem0 as well? So, because what you're describing is basically like it's basically like an application architecture or engineering challenge, where like how you take information out of the interaction patterns in your app and then convert it or use LLMs, in this case, use AI tools to build it into structured data that enhances the user experience based on the memory storage. So it's not just like, all right, Tom likes, I don't know, pine trees or whatever it is. You know, I've got 1,000 pine cones behind me.
Right.
It's like smarter than that.
Right.
It has nuance and it uses LLM tooling to basically store and retrieve. That's pretty much it.
Exactly. And it allows you to capture more context from the actual conversation that you're having, or even a workflow. Where, think about like a RAG database. It might have, say you're doing customer service. The agent goes out to the service tickets database and says, we see you have an open ticket. Well, that's great, but there's a lot of context that happens in the conversation that could allow the organization to be more proactive, right? So if the customer is indicating, you know, I'm really dissatisfied type of stuff, well, if you just have a RAG knowledge base set up, unless you specifically create some type of workflow for that, you're not going to capture that. You'll just have an agent that says, hey, I have your ticket number, here's the latest update, and maybe it will change the status or something like that, add some notes. That's just a general example. I mean, there's...
I think, so I'm going to share my screen and we can go through a couple of examples of this. But, here we go. Like what you're describing is kind of like where it started, right? Which was, let's get can I encode and make it easier for an LLM to traverse a data, like a knowledge graph, that it's easier for it and makes it faster, which happen to be vector stores because that's how they actually process tokens, right? There is an inherent like vectorized kind of data processing flow. Is that a good way to sort of summarize it, or am I getting it wrong?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, the next, like these guys, so I don't know if you've seen Zep here. These guys have their open source kind of package that came out. A lot of these memory players as apps came out of different research papers. These guys started an open source package called Graffiti, and all of it is built on top of Neo4j. If you're not familiar with Neo4j, is like the leader in graph databases. I noticed you had a Neo4j MCP running there before, but
yeah, they use it all the time.
Yeah, cool. Well, their whole concept, which you can see from this like little screen grab they've got here, is that you can inject contextually relevant information based on a knowledge graph for an LLM faster than you can in any other knowledge, in any other kind of knowledge abstraction kind of layer. I haven't used these things in anger enough to know if that's relevant. However, if that's the case, however, if you are dealing with a use case where like a chat bot, I could see how it would really work, because there's two levels of memory, right? There's the user memory and how the LLM stores information about the user that they're communicating with. You can store based on IDs. Well, there's different ways to do it. And as it learns about that user. But it also needs to have data injected about that user from, you know, a customer data platform or whatever. So in an e-commerce example, you know, this is a pretty simple example, but you get the idea. I love Adidas, and I'm really angry because my Adidas is broken. Shoes are broken. But then there's also the assistant knowledge graph, which is hidden from the user, which also can pull in memory and information. So for example, in a banking context, you can imagine that it would be very, very relevant to pull in, say, data that could be supplied by a knowledge graph, like Zep or Graffiti or whatever it is, that may raise like fraud concerns that are not exposed to the user that they're interacting with at the time, right? That truncate the behavior or change the assistant's behavior in real time. But it's not always just about what the user knows. It's also what the assistant knows as well. Which I thought was an interesting kind of layer of how these...
And then the Mem0 paper... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go, man.
along the same lines, they talk about basically a two-stage extraction process, and it's when you're talking about the graph database and the relationships. So in Mem0, they are talking about entity extraction as one stage, and then the second stage is relationship generation. So having the intelligence to not only pull out what might be additional context, but what does it mean in relation to all the data that we already have. And I believe you mentioned ZEP. I believe Mem0 is leveraging ZEP.
Okay. And they're all using Neo4j.
Neo4j, right.
Yeah.
And I'm excited because I do a lot of these same types of things manually using the same tools, Neo4j, and it's essentially automated method for how I was avoiding OpenAI memories.
It's interesting. So the LangChain guys have LangMem, right? And it has similar abstractions. So it's a package you can use. You can use it independently. And it's got they've basically just got a relational database kind of management layer behind the scenes for it. Which is interesting. But Harrison Chase, who's the founder of LangChain, mentioned that he's not convinced effectively that this knowledge graph is the right paradigm, which is interesting given how many of these AI apps he would see. If you could get most of the way there just with Postgres with the PG vector on top, it may actually just be fine, right? What I found kind of interesting, I am just mentioning that if you are interested, I found it really good on the deep learning AI. They've got a really good course those guys did about memory that I was going through, just updating myself on, which is free. You should check it out. What I didn't really get a sense of is recommendations around how you should structure. Say if you do just have a simple database schema of how you structure your memory for your agent. And maybe we could talk about Letta next because they have pretty interesting documentation on this and how they do it. But it's sort of there's not really a industry defined way of how you should structure your memories to make your LLM applications more effective. A lot of people just say, well, it depends. It just depends on the business application. That is true because if you build a CRM, you'd say, all right, well, the data model that we model for is I've got users, I've got contacts, I've got companies, I've got deals, whatever, the data modeling. And I would say, well, you just need to model your memory store based on that. But like you said, there's other things in how you want these apps to behave that are novel to them, like its tone and its style, the things that it says to the user or keeps to itself. Those things are not easy to model in the way that engineers are used to modeling these data points. So
right.
Yeah.
And there are implications if you get that wrong too, right? It's actually really important to get that right in most cases. If it's your personal bot or something or agent, no big deal. But if you're implementing within an organization and you have the wrong tone or the wrong memory that didn't occur or that happened somewhere else, I mean, it could be very problematic. And that's why for these newer platforms and ideas that we're talking about, it's all taken care of for you. You don't have to necessarily design that all yourself.
I think it's interesting we're now talking about this because in the past it was sort of in the recent past, the past 2 years, when you're building these kinds of apps, we've basically been set, a lot of people were just worried about all right, we'll stop it from hallucinating. And we've kind of gotten over, in many contexts, we've got the tooling to kind of get out of those situations for agentic applications or chatbots at the least. So a chatbot on a car website's very unlikely to sell a Tesla to someone who's trying to buy a Volkswagen now, whereas that did happen in the past. But so it's kind of a good sign that we're evolving to this point where it's well, I just need it to
answer a customer support query in the tone and style of my human agents and how we talk and use my company's language, all of those different things. That's a relatively simple application. What I find interesting and something that I really want to dive into is how you then encode an entire organization's kind of way of operating into a memory store, and how do you make that store transferable so that I can pick it up and easily go into another model provider and have it function in a similar way. How can I fine-tune models on top of it and then upgrade models using my own memory layer that effectively acts as a model fine-tuner or a model like a customization store. Those are the things that I really want. I would love to see some apps or applications like DevTools come out more aggressively attacking that.
For a long time, you've heard people talking about the AI operating system, and in my opinion, haven't been anywhere close by definition of operating system, but this is a massive step in that direction.
Yeah. Have you used Letta very much?
I haven't. I set up some demos and some test accounts, but I have not gone deep with Letta yet.
Yeah, so this is their I'll get out of I'm in their tool manager, I'll just zoom in. Can you see that okay?
I can see it okay, yeah.
Yeah, you can see it okay. I'll talk you through. So Letta is cool. So they came out of, or the two founders, or one of the founders, I believe, at a minimum, was on the paper called MemGPT, I believe it was. I'll put it in the show notes. But they then built this agentic tool on top with memory. I guess it's a light agent layer, not as enterprise, I would say, as LangChain, but with more of a focus on this memory state. And then they had this concept of, recently they released this concept of sleep time compute, which is, if you look at some of their developer documentation, they basically talk about the Letta documentation. They talk about memory as basically memory blocks. So you build an agent, you tell the agent that it's a customer support bot or something like that. So this one, the personal assistant who answers user questions using Google Web Search. I'll turn off debug mode and make it just interactive here. You can see the agent. I can chat with it. This is just like the playground they have. And then they have this concept of the Letta core tools where you've got like memory updates, archiving, replacement, or retrieval. Effectively, they build their tools, and they're just LLM tools. So it's very similar to how you would structure your tools if you're using, say, OpenAI. And then in the back end, they let you build your model, your memory layer however you want with whatever state that you would like. So memory blocks are basically just like little pieces of code that are injected into the context with updates from the memory retrieval. So it's a relatively simple system, right? On top of that, they then released this thing called sleep time compute, which I think is a pretty fancy way of just saying, if you've got an agent, you can have another agent running in the background that will then go and gracefully update your memory store based on interactions that agent's having. So it will it's sort of like a cron job update of like a cron job in the background where like a higher quality, higher cost agent, LLM, will then take all of that learning and in a consistent fashion go and update your memory store, keeping everything in sync, but also doing it thoughtfully, comparatively thoughtfully, so that it's constantly improving the quality of the outcome without actually having to do, say, LoRa or some of these other fine-tuning things or change your system prompt, right? Which is interesting.
Exactly. And it makes me wonder about fine-tuning. And I've never been somebody who's deep into fine-tuning anyways, but does that create less of a need? I mean, it seems like over time I hear more people saying we don't need to fine-tune. But to me, this seems like very similar solution, or at least target goal as fine tuning.
Yeah. The last one I want to talk to on this memory conversation is specifically about fine tuning using memory, because it's a pretty hardcore step, and whether it is required or not, or how much of of what you need the model to achieve can be just done with really great memory injection in the context in the attention layer, and system prompt updates. So what I find interesting about that is that I put it into a cursor window so it's a bit easier to see, is actually the system prompt that these guys use, so the Letta guys use. So you can see context and memory management. They've got all these like memory blocks here, and this is basically just something that's really simple that's injected. It's just literally a chunk of data coming out of your store that you define, and it's defined. They had their version, which is the assistant versus the human. They recommend like the assistant, the persona, is like adapting the behavior of the LLM in real time using memory and updating those as memory blocks that you have in store. For example, customer support agent starts talking to a small business owner. Automatically, the persona gets updated to reflect that kind of customer type, as opposed to, say, enterprise, whatever it is. And then what they know about the human on the other end, which is like what I know about your account as, a small business customer, for example. Those blocks go in and out, and then you can customize which agents have the right or the permission set to update memory blocks. So you might not want your actual agent being able to manage its own memory. You may only ever want that to be offloaded to another agent, or you can have in real time the agent updating the memory blocks about the customer, but not updating the persona blocks in real time, because you want it consistent, right? So I think that's pretty good as an abstraction that these guys have sort of defined. Yeah, it's worth checking out and playing with. They've got their agent development environment here, which is a lot of fun. And I might move on, but I'll post their system prompt as a link into the show notes, because it's worth reading, because it's a good comparison based on what we were talking about last week. On system prompt structure, it's very nuanced and has a lot of personality injection into it, more than I was expecting.
I was thinking, if you're somebody within an organization that's responsible for data governance, we're going into multiple layers of memory, storage, prompts, and I think I'm like, does that make your life easier or harder?
Yeah.
It seems like it gives you more, if you're defining your system prompts and how this is going to interface with your memories and all this context, but it's a lot more, I don't know, it's a question. I mean, does that question even make sense, or anything along those lines that you've been thinking about?
Well, yeah, so I was dealing with this on a voice agent that we haven't put it into production yet. We were building out the first version, and we were grappling with this around like prompt versioning based on learning and updates. So versioning, which you can do in the playgrounds of a lot of the API kind of providers. But what's interesting is once you get into a real like scaled application environment, like what's your version control on prompts, and how do you do progressive delivery on an agent update based on, say it passes your evals in offline and goes into online. How do you do progressive delivery of your agent based on prompt updates and then rollbacks just based on the system prompt, and how does your infrastructure facilitate that is an interesting, obviously, like if it's just like a piece of code, which is often like, say for example in some of the applications that you and I have played with, they just have a prompt file and all the prompt file, like a prompt folder and all the prompt files in MD, and then you could, check that out and have that managed in a certain way, and the rights to update system prompts, all the prompts within an application are managed. But at scale, it obviously happens, right? And it obviously causes problems. For example, there was the X controversy recently where like they chalked it up to someone made an update to the Grok system prompt that was unauthorized. Right. So
Yeah,
it can have some pretty significant impacts.
Exactly. And with Letta, it's hosted, they have a hosted solution, and then you could also run this in your own environment as well.
Yeah. So they've got a local dev environment that you can use. They have this hosted one and the cloud one, and it's pretty easy just to get started with it. So you can get started, create a couple of agents. This is an agent example in here, and then they've got these like quick start agent templates, a multi-agent system. You can spin it up. Yeah.
Right. And that's where the reason I brought that up, I come from a infrastructure and cloud infrastructure background. And just a little bit ago, I mentioned building an ecosystem. And we have all these different products and platforms to choose from, and most of the time it's going to be an API and some hosted platform. And things can become segmented very quickly. And if you have if you think about it, you have your databases in Azure, and then you have your agent memory in Letta, and then you have your agentic workflows in LangGraph. I mean, it's a lot of new things to manage.
Yeah.
Figure out how to manage those.
Yeah, as it's rapidly expanding developer infrastructure. I would assume that it's going to coalesce around like one or two providers, like it did with exactly in the same way that it happened with vector stores, and there will be a specific way, and then every single infrastructure provider will have like a layer on top, right? That will execute your agentic memory store in a certain pattern, but that pattern just doesn't exist.
Well, it's inevitable. MCP and A2A, agent to agent protocol, and you see people out there yelling about I shouldn't say yelling, but memory, like a standardized memory layer. That's the natural next step. I think that's coming soon, hopefully.
Yeah, well, that takes me to the last point I want on this like discussion, which is that MemOS or MemOS paper. They have tried to recommend an application architecture for that, but without putting any code forward. But one of the last pieces they have is they were putting forward is this idea of a semi-frequent low-rank adaptation update to the base model based on your memory store with checkpoints and rollbacks, which I find interesting. But I mean, it's not really a thing that I had considered as a viable pathway for memory. But if you think about, the more I thought about it, the more attractive it became, because in my area of sort of software and professional life, so marketing and sales, if you really think about like your competitive advantage as an organization in, say, the enterprise software selling space, there is a way and a path that you forge that becomes your defensibility once you get to scale. And that might be a unique understanding of your ICP and its match to your product set, the best path and approach for certain prospects in certain moments of the sales process, the best way to do things, and how your organization has learnt that. And that is really important. And if you could encode that into like a frontier model, I think there would be significant value in at least exploring it, because then you could have those really nuanced injections with your agents in real time that would reflect things like really subtle things like when you're talking to this prospect based on every conversation you've had, Cameron, as like an account executive, these are the things you need to know because these are the decision makers above that person. This is everything about the organization. This is how deals like that have played out every time in your, over the past year. you need to make these steps, you need to speak in this way, you need to say these certain things and keywords, whatever it is. And that's what you do as a sales manager when you're coaching, right? If it could get there, then I think what these MemOS guys are recommending is valid. So Fireworks is like a model hosting provider where they kind of pitch themselves as the place where you go to customize and fine tune models for yourself. And like I was checking out, they've got a few guides on this. There's the Open AI documentation has like fine tuning documentation as well, and it doesn't take a lot. And also with LoRa, it's not as expensive. So like I don't know if like your perception of fine tuning, I was basically like, oh, it's just wait for the models to get better and it should be better. But if you could get this nuance down, then it would be worthwhile. The next question that usually comes after that is like, well, I'm fine-tuning an open model and then Claude 4 comes out and I'm completely screwed because I've got to go through the process again. But if you have a tight coupling, between your memory layer and your store and its ability to fine-tune and LoRa update in a sequence that you know and understand as an engineering organization, then it shouldn't be that significant a migration path. It's just like how we would migrate from, a React version or a Node version or any of these things. Like we're used to migrating. So if it could be structured in that way, then I think that's the most interesting part of this memory kind of conversation, which is not so much memory as like what it knows about me. It's like how it behaves for real, So that's, I'll post a few more.
And correct me.
Yeah. This is a deep field, right? I'll post a few more articles and stuff about it. Like it goes a long way. I think we should probably do a LoRa kind of session live next. But yeah. But sorry, go on. What were you going to say?
Yeah, in the MemOS paper, they talked a lot about the Mem cube. So I think that's what you're talking about. Or correct me if I'm wrong there. Yeah. Yeah,
but I don't think these are anything other than just like graphics on a page that these guys have come up with. Like there's no code coming out of it, right?
There's another project I saw called MemOS, but I was like, oh, this is not it. This is not what I'm looking for.
Okay. That was a really good conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, man, it's fun every week. Like I said, it's hard to get through everything and probably harder to decide what we want to focus on because I get excited about so many things every day. It's not all every week, it's every single day.
Yeah. Well, I think like memory is a big part, right? Like that's a core part of if you're going to be, as you describe, an AI engineer or an agent engineer. Understanding and architecting a memory layer is important now and will become more important, I think.
100%.
And it's like one of the key parts of building these apps that can be enterprise grade. There's like memory and how it deals with, like how you deal with memory. There's like prompt engineering, there's evals, and then there's infrastructure as well. Like, I think, that was really good. One of the reasons why I really want to dive into it is for that specific marketing and sales use case. I think there is an unlock for agents in that domain if you can get the nuance correct, which is different to say a coding agent, which is very determined. It's very easy to evaluate its quality of output, but it's very challenging for someone who works in, say, that example I was giving before around like a sales process to know if like what they're getting out of like an LLM is really a reflection of like best practice for your organization, for example.
Right. Well, we don't have time to show it, but I will. Yeah, I'll just plug. We were planning to show the demo of the LangGraph agent deployment. I kind of showed it there, but I set up a demo and I put it out there on GitHub publicly, so you can go clone that project. And I tried to make it as easy as possible to get going. You will need a LangGraph platform account though. But if you're interested in that and you have questions, feel free to reach out. My contact information is out there, and it's something I'm really excited about. So maybe we'll get into that next time. And then the Open Agent platform as well.
Yeah, I'm really keen to see that actually. All right, this has been great, man. Thank you.
Cool. Well, Tom, you have a great rest of your week. Appreciate you.
Yeah, you too, man.